Okay, peace be upon you and God's mercy. In the name of God, and praise be to God, and prayers and peace be upon the messenger of God. There is nothing easy except what you make easy, and you make sorrow easy. If you will, O God, teach us what benefits us, and benefit us with what you have taught us, and increase us in knowledge. Make all our work purely for your noble countenance, and do not let anyone else have anything in it, O Lord of the worlds. This is the second session of the prophetic biography sessions. May the best prayers and peace be upon its owner. We ask God Almighty to grant us the joy of seeing our prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him, just as we believed in him without seeing him, and not to separate us from him until he admits us into his presence. We spoke, or rather concluded, last time, when we mentioned their migration to Abyssinia. Yes, and we stopped at the dangerous plot that Amr ibn al-As, the Quraysh ambassador to the Negus, devised to hand over the wanted men. He initially wanted to speak to them, not of the Negus speak to them. When the Negus spoke to them, and our master Jafar, may God be pleased with him, eloquently explained the cause of Islam and the situation of the Muslims in Mecca, addressing a Christian man who understood the meaning of idol worship, injustice and morality, and also a just man who understood the meaning of oppression, torture, and persecution. The Negus refused to hand over the Muslims who had sought refuge with him. So our Master Amr ibn al-As entered the next greater stage, saying, "By God, I will plot against them with what I will plot against them, and tomorrow I will come to him with what will eradicate their greenness." Eradicate their greenness is an expression the Arabs knew, meaning to eradicate their existence, to wipe them out. Even his companion in the embassy, Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'a, was concerned. "I will tell him tomorrow that they say Jesus, son of Mary, is a servant." Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'a, the ambassador of the Quraysh, said, "Do not do that, for they have kinship ties with us, and even if they disagree with us, they still have kinship ties with us." Because, as we said, this, my friends, is a serious matter, because it portrays Muslims not only as a threat to the Quraysh, but also as a threat to the Negus and to Abyssinian national security in our modern terms. Furthermore, it is an insult. It is like insulting the most sacred of things to Christians. It is like, for example, in America, insulting the founding fathers or the American scholar, like in Turkey attacking Ataturk, like in Iran attacking Khomeini. Their sacred meaning upon which the state was built. Yes, we can say it is like anti-Semitism in our time. But our master Amr ibn al-As, of course, was one of the most astute Arabs, and he would not accept returning having failed. It would be a diplomatic failure and an insult to the reputation of the Quraysh. I am trying to use modern terms so that we can get closer to the reality of the biography, and so that the biography is not just a story far removed from our minds. Okay, so if he entered and said, "O king," meaning, "I want another round of debate," then the Negus summoned them again. Look here, Amr ibn al-As, may God be pleased with him, later. But he said to him, "O king, they say something terrible about Jesus, son of Mary." He didn't say, "They say he is a servant," but rather, "They say something terrible about Jesus, son of Mary." This is to let your imagination run wild. This must be a meteor statement, right? No, no, it's you, sir. But the sound. Yes, it's possible, it's fine, but it's not working for you. They say something terrible about Jesus, son of Mary, so you let your imagination run wild. It's like when you go to someone and want to incite them, and you say, so-and-so said something about, you know, I can't repeat it, I can't say it. What did he say? No, it's not possible, I'm too shy, my tongue can't utter it. They say something terrible about Jesus, son of Mary. And that's why I emphasize what we mentioned last time, that the fields of the humanities don't include backward peoples. I mean, the principles of politics and commerce, and the economy, and there are no backward peoples in it. You see, in the ancient empires that may not have been advanced in science and applied knowledge, they managed these matters of sociology, control over the masses and media discourse, just as modern states manage them. Man is man, exactly. This is similar. For example, I will give you an older example than this, similar to what Pharaoh said to Moses, did we not raise you among us as a child, and you remained among us for many years of your life, and you did what you did? What is that? Killing a man by mistake. Pharaoh, who issued a decree to kill children. What do you think of Moses' accidental killing? The crime that he is unable to say, and you did what you did, and you are one of the disbelievers. Imagine. So, our master Amr ibn al-As conveyed to the Negus in this statement. He said, what do you say about Jesus? Of course, when the Muslims learned, as we mentioned in the previous session, that they sat down to consult, they said, what will we say to the Negus tomorrow if he asks us about our statement concerning Jesus? They said, by God, we will only say about him what the messenger of God taught us. Of course, we are speaking now knowing the end of the story, but this option at that time was like a martyrdom operation. Because attacking the sacred, attacking the national flag, attacking the Constitution, directly equals surrender and deportation. So, imagine, for example, that the Egyptians or Syrians would take a step that would lead to their surrender to Sisi and Bashar. This at that time was like a martyrdom decision. So, Jafar, may God be pleased with him, spoke and said, we will only say about him what the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, taught us. He is the servant of God and his messenger, his word which he bestowed upon Mary, and a spirit from him. If you recall, in the previous meeting, the first meeting, when Jafar spoke, he entered a council where the patriarchs were present. The patriarchs had spread out their scriptures, meaning their gospels, and demanded that the Negus hand over the Muslims. But when they heard Jafar's words and what he recited from the Holy Quran, the Negus wept, and his patriarchs wept, until the Negus's beard and their scriptures were soaked. This was in the first meeting, but in the second meeting, when they heard these words, of course, the Negus, when he heard this, Salamah, may God be pleased with her, narrated the hadith, saying, he struck his hand on the ground, striking it as if I were now taking a thread from this fabric, and he said, by God, nothing you have brought is equal to what Jesus brought and what Jesus said about himself. So the patriarchs began to grumble, and he said, by God, even if you grumble, and after that, a kind of because of this matter. But here, what I want to focus on now is that when the Muslims took this stance, they did not know that the Negus might tolerate this statement. Rather, they took it and risked a great risk in that. But God, blessed and exalted is He, was merciful to them in another context. And we mentioned that this was a diplomatic battle between the Quraysh and the Muslims in another context. Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, sent a message to the Negus, and in it, as was the custom of the Arabs, were verses of poetry. He said in it, "Oh, I wish I knew how Jafar and Umar are in the flute, and the enemies are the relatives." Now, the situation of the Muslims is that they are in he was a stranger, and a king was far away, and their enemies were their relatives. I wonder how Jafar and Amr were in the flute. I think he means Amr ibn Sa'id ibn al-As and Amr. He considered the enemies to be relatives. Did the Negus's actions affect Jafar? Did he harm them? Did the Negus's actions affect Jafar and his companions? Or did a troublemaker hinder that? I wonder, what were the matters? What was there that hindered this and caused trouble? He spoke later with the Negus, praising him, saying, "Know that God has given you his bounty and generosity, so no one who is distant from you will suffer," and so on. And you are a bounty with abundant qualities, and so on. With this speech with which he praised the Negus, it was like a diplomatic battle between the camp of the Muslims and the camp of the Negus. Of course, here Amr ibn al-As returned and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabia returned, of course, and their mission failed. And Salamah said, "We were with the Negus in the best of homes and with the best of neighbors, and the Negus ordered that we would not be harmed." The Negus, it seems, granted them this special protection. Yes, Salamah, or Salamah, yes. No, Salamah is married. No, Salamah is present in both. Yes, the hadith of Ismail will come upon returning to Abyssinia. I will come to it now, God willing. Okay, what happened after that was that the Negus, of course, returned the gifts of Amr ibn al-As and said, "Go, for you are safe in my land," meaning, you are safe from whoever insults you. Whoever insults you will be fined. Whoever insults you will be fined. Whoever insults you will be fined. By God, I would love to have a mountain of gold, meaning a mountain of gold, and I would not have harmed one of you. Okay, and of course, Salamah narrates that the matter did not last long before a rebellion against the Negus erupted after this incident. She says, "By God, we have never been so sad as we were. We feared that the matter would fall into the hands of a man other than the Negus, and he would not know our rights as the Negus knew them. And a battle ensued, and in the battle, they sent our master, Zubair ibn al-Awwam, who was the youngest of the people. Our master, Zubair, swam in the Nile." She said, "So they inflated a water skin for him, and he put it on his chest and crossed the Nile so that he watched the scene from afar. Then he brought them news of the Negus's victory over those who rebelled against him and said, 'Rejoice, God has destroyed you,' meaning God has granted victory to the Negus and destroyed his enemy." Salamah said, "I have never found us happier than we were in this place, with the Negus in the best of homes with the best of neighbors." These companions, as we mentioned, did not return until the 7th year of the Hijra. The 7th year of the Hijra, exactly, meaning 15 years after this moment when we are speaking. When they returned, Asma bint Umays, the wife of Jafar ibn Abi Talib, exactly when she returned, went to Hafsa, the wife of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, to visit her. Then Umar entered upon his daughter and said, "Who is this?" Of course, Asma bint Umays said, "This Abyssinian woman, this one who traveled by sea." Then he said to her, "We preceded you in Medina, so we are more deserving of the messenger of God than you. Of course, the companions were competing to be close to the messenger of God, may God bless him and grant him peace. The most famous example of this was when our master Salman, may God be pleased with him, dug the trench. The Muhajirun said, Salman is one of us, O Muhajirun. Now, a great invention had occurred, which was the trench. The Ansar said, no, Salman is one of us, O Ansar. Our master, Salman could have taken both positions. He migrated from Persia, but before the Prophet came to Medina, he was from the people of Medina, meaning he was a slave in Medina. So the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, said, Salman is one of us, the people of the house. So, in the context of this competition, Asma bint Umays became angry and said, no, by God, you are not more deserving of the messenger of God than we are. You were with the messenger of God, feeding your hungry and teaching your ignorant, while we were in the land of the distant and hateful, and we were harmed and afraid. And by God, no, meaning I couldn't wait until the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, came. Of course, Lady Isma went angrily to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and said, O Messenger of God, Ibn al-Khattab claimed such and such. He replied, no one is closer to you than him and his companions. They made one migration, while you made two, so they were called the companions of the two migrations. Lady Asma bint Umays said, the immigrants to Abyssinia rushed to her, asking her about this hadith, seeking confirmation from her. But here, there's a lesson we'll come to later. How can Asma say, we were in the land of the distant, hateful, and we were harmed and afraid? And how can Salam say, we were with him in the best of homes, with our best of neighbors? In a little while, God willing, we'll unravel this verse, this entanglement. Well, we are now almost at the first instance of international political entanglement in the Prophet's biography. Therefore, we have before us a rich and abundant discussion with many lessons. I want you to sharpen your minds and ears. I think I've compiled a lesson. I've gathered 16 lessons for you from this migration. May God's prayers and peace be upon the Prophet. Oh, and what I should also mention is that the Negus embraced Islam. The Negus embraced Islam, but he concealed his Islam, and so when the Negus died in the 8th or 9th year, according to differing accounts, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, performed the funeral prayer in absentia for him in Medina, and said, a righteous man has died today. Stand and pray for your brother, Sharmer. Sharmer was his name. We said that he was the Negus. This was a title, just as the king of Egypt was called Pharaoh, or Chosroes, or Caesar. Okay, now, the first lesson is that the idea of religion and the message cannot triumph except through sacrifices. First, the torture that befell the Muslims, then the migration and exile in the land. Okay. Otherwise, as we mentioned before, the enemies of the call are usually the affluent. Okay, but an idea cannot spread, even if it is a false and corrupt idea, unless there are those who carry this idea. So now we can say that the safety of the Muslims in Abyssinia is part of the fruit of sacrifice, the sacrifice of torture, meaning patience with torture first, then the sacrifice of leaving and parting from the country and family and remaining in a foreign land. A second lesson, which we also referred to, is that just as believers are commanded to be patient, persevering, and steadfast, the Islamic leadership is tasked with finding solutions, alternatives, and suitable places to prevent persecution. Muslims. This means enduring prolonged torment, which only the most exceptional people can withstand. Therefore, it is the duty of the leadership, the responsibility of those in charge, and the duty of those whom God has entrusted with the affairs of Muslims and these preachers to constantly reflect on their circumstances, just as they are required to be patient. The leadership is also required to find alternatives and suitable places for them. The third lesson is that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was aware of the political landscape of his time. We mentioned that among the leaders of the Arabian Peninsula and those who came after them, such as Chosroes and Caesar, he chose the Negus. Therefore, whoever assumes a position of authority over the affairs of Muslims must be aware of this surrounding political landscape, otherwise he is not following the path of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. Lesson 4. The family of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, were at the forefront of those who were harmed in the cause of God. This means that we have from the family of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, his daughter Ruqayyah, the wife of Uthman, may God be pleased with him. The Prophet did not torture or oppress Ruqayyah, nor did he stipulate to Uthman that he keep her. He did not tell him, where will you take the girl to Abyssinia, the land of the distant and the hateful. So the first to be harmed and to live with the affairs of the Muslims were the family of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, and his daughter. The second was Ja'far, may God be pleased with him. Abu Talib was the one who protected the Prophet, but Ja'far was the one who emigrated and was the leader of the Muslims in Abyssinia. So this is truly what gives us a lesson in which we see the closeness of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, to his followers, and that he did not take anything for himself without them, and that he was not in luxury, and he did not mean to put his family and relatives in luxury, while he put them in hardship and tribulation. This is a lesson that everyone who is in charge of these affairs of the Muslims must learn. And you know the saying of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, whoever sleeps while deceiving his subjects, God will forbid paradise for him. O God, whoever is entrusted with any of the affairs of my nation, and makes things difficult for them, make things difficult for him. This is one of the things in which the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, set an example for us himself. Well, we mentioned that the migration to Abyssinia was not just an escape for the sake of religion, but rather it was like establishing a new base and staying in a new place, and it meant laying a new nucleus and a new center for the Islamic call, so that if the people in Mecca were persecuted, the Muslims would have other alternatives. We mentioned that we deduced this from the names of those who migrated, and among them were those who were not persecuted. We mentioned at their head Ruqayyah, and at their head Ja'far and Abu Hudayfa. Utbah ibn Rabi'ah was not being persecuted. We also mentioned that among those who would migrate to Abyssinia was Abu Bakr, may God be pleased with him, and he was not being persecuted. He was prominent among his people, had it not been for Ibn al-Baghin's protection of him, as we mentioned in the previous lesson. The sixth lesson. This is a serious lesson. We mentioned that when the people of Abyssinia returned in what year? 7 years after the Hijra, our master Ja'far came after the conquest of Khaybar. Therefore, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, by God, I do not know which I am more pleased with, the conquest of Khaybar or the arrival of Ja'far. Our master Ja'far died in the 8th year of the Hijra during the Battle of Mu'tah. Now, if we try to imagine this man who remained an immigrant in Abyssinia for 15 years, having left without being persecuted, it would be natural that after his return and the establishment of the Islamic State, he would rest a little, receive a retirement bonus, and be considered among the veterans or the old fighters. But no, the hand, and it was cut off. So he carried it in his left hand, and it was cut off. So he held it with his 2 arms and struck. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, God has replaced them for him. 2 wings with which he flies in paradise. A 7th lesson is the clear lesson, which is that religion is more precious than the homeland. Religion is more precious than the homeland, more precious than family, more precious than kinship, more precious than tribalism, more precious than the tribe. And you see the companions of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, left Mecca, which is the holiest of God's lands and the most beloved of God's lands to God and to his messenger, and it is their homeland and the most beloved of lands to them, and they left it. Why did they leave it? To preserve their religion, to flee with their religion, to be saved from being tempted in their religion. O people of goodness, in our days we need to reflect on this lesson, a great need. Because we now live in a time in which people are divided into homelands, into countries, into states, and the first affiliation that a person is given in the media, in education, and in culture is affiliation to what? Yes, to the point that this is the reality of belonging to the state and to the homeland. This has raised many problems and many suspicions. I would almost say that 3/4 of the contemporary intellectual problems in the Islamic situation are due to this exchange that has occurred between the sanctity of religion and the sanctity of the homeland. I mean, a very simple example. Now, how many times in your life have you heard about renewing religious discourse? How many times have you ever heard about renewing national discourse? Never, because now it has become required for religion to adapt to the interests of the homeland, to the interests of the state, of course in our countries, to the interests of the authority, to the interests of the ruler. But even if we have it, we will forget now that we have a crisis, even if the one who rules us is just, but within a secular national framework, which is more sacred in the conscience of the Muslim religion or homeland. I mean, now, if we find our child in a Western country and the Western country is really interested in providing services to its citizens, and it is a secular state that does not differentiate between citizens, which is more sacred to the Muslim religion or homeland, religion should be a priority. But the truth is the sanctity of the nation has become so inflated in our minds that it has surpassed religion. Simply put, now you find strong doubts surrounding the issue of apostasy. They ask, why kill the apostate? Isn't this a matter of personal choice, a form of personal freedom? He's convinced that Islam isn't good. He's convinced that Christianity isn't good. There should be freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. Therefore, the punishment for apostasy raises problems for many people. But if someone is told that high treason or spying for the enemy is punishable by death, you find this punishment acceptable. So, why is this rejected and this accepted? Why didn't it occur to them that this spy was exercising his natural right to think? As an Egyptian, for example, I found that Israel is a democratic state and a state with human rights. I am free whether I am right or wrong, misguided or not. The point is, I have personal freedom, and I see that it is in Egypt's best interest to be under American hegemony or Israeli hegemony, or under any other Saudi hegemony, even if it's not important now. But if I were caught spying for another country and sentenced for high treason and execution, you wouldn't find this objectionable. Why? Why isn't this considered freedom of opinion, thought, expression, and stance? Because the sanctity of the homeland and the sanctity of the state are no longer in question. They are now considered indisputable. Therefore, execution or killing If we want to simplify things, apostasy from loyalty to the homeland and belonging to the homeland. Let's take, for example, the Takwin Foundation, which was established. You find many people asking you, why are you afraid of Takwin? Are they a group of atheists or a group of secularists capable of intimidating Muslims? Is Islam weak? Is Islam fragile? Is Islam incapable of fighting? A group of writers who say this. If an institution were established in their country, and let me give Egypt as an example, what would you think if an institution were established in Egypt, funded by Turkey, calling for Egypt to be placed under Turkish sovereignty? What would their reaction be? Would they say, Egypt isn't strong, Egypt isn't weak, Egypt isn't fragile, Egypt won't be affected by this? They wouldn't say that. They would see it as dangerous. Even if the speakers were discussing a topic that has no future, what if a group emerged a call for the restoration of the monarchy and the return of Prince Ahmed Farouk or King Ahmed Farouk to the throne of Egypt as the legitimate king, who obtained it from his father in a military coup in July 1952. Is this to be tolerated? And it is said that the Republic is a strong state and that Egypt has taken great steps towards the future, and no one in Egypt accepts the call for the monarchy. So let them do what they want. If someone burns the Egyptian flag in Tahrir Square, will the patriots come out and say that it is just a piece of cloth that will not affect the patriotism of the Egyptians, will not tarnish the belonging of the Egyptians, and will not affect the great Egypt? None of this happens. Why? Because, my friends, the truth is that over the long period we've been living through, there's been a shift from the sanctity of religion to the sanctity of the nation, the sanctity of the state. So now, anything that touches the state, offends the state, or endangers the state is understood to warrant the severest punishment. But when religion was trivialized, those who touch upon it and attack it are called freedom of opinion and freedom of expression. Is religion so weak that it can't withstand those who engage in intellectual debate? This is extremely dangerous, and I tell you perhaps 3/4 of their jurisprudential problems or doubts that exist in the history, that is, those that exist in the reality of Muslims, stem from this. The center of sanctity has shifted from religion to the nation. Therefore, what touches upon religion is acceptable, but what touches upon the nation is not. And by the way, if any of you have encountered some doubts, or if you've heard a jurisprudential ruling that you found strange, conduct a practical test to apply this jurisprudential ruling to the nation. You'll find it acceptable. Whether in your own mind and conscience or in the minds of contemporaries, you must understand that Islamic jurisprudence was produced by a capable nation. Jurisprudence, as crafted by our scholars, is a test of our time. 1,000 years, 100 years, 1,200 years, this jurisprudence was produced by a capable nation. The jurist wasn't psychologically defeated. He didn't have any ideas other than the dominant Islamic ideology that determined his direction. Therefore, he produced a capable jurisprudence. A defeated nation now doesn't understand this capable jurisprudence. It does, and comprehend it, and sometimes even finds it objectionable. This is a very important matter. This migration to Abyssinia tells us that religion is more precious than the homeland, and that religion is above the homeland. May God bless you. Okay. Lesson 8. We covered all of this in Lesson 7. By the way, what I like about this, and I'm actually confused now, is the one who said this, Sheikh Said al-Nasi or Sheikh Said Purin, God knows best. I don't know, but he was one of those tried before the Turkish courts here during the early days because he ordered the hijab or because his wife didn't remove it, and so on. The judge would say to him, "So what's the problem with a hijab? It's just a piece of cloth." He replied, "This is the knowledge that behind you is a piece of cloth. What if we removed it and brought the American flag or the Greek flag? Both are pieces of cloth." This is a true story that illustrates where the center of sanctity has gone. It's all just a piece of cloth, but the meanings and implications it conveys are completely different. The eighth lesson is to understand this ignorance that pursues those who leave it and is not at ease with their escape or their fleeing from its grasp. God Almighty said, "And they will continue to fight you until you leave their land. And they will continue to fight you until they turn you back from your religion if they are able. And the Jews and the Christians will never be pleased with you until you follow their religion." God gave us an example in the story of our master Moses. "Send with me the children of Israel and do not torment them." When the children of Israel first fled, they said, "Indeed, these are but a small band, and indeed they are enraging us, and indeed we are all on guard." So they pursued them eastward, until, when he found before him a huge miracle, the sea became dry land. I can't imagine it, but when God seals hearts, imagine the sea before you transformed into a dry path. But this is the ignorant and tyrannical soul. The pre-Islamic Arabs commanded people to follow them, even if they weren't planning to believe. Thinking is pointless. It's a strange sight, a strange scene, a miracle. When you see something strange, stop for a moment. But he went on, and his soldiers followed him. These soldiers, the soldiers working in the security and military apparatus, are the furthest people from guidance, unfortunately. I mean, if their leadership is bad and misleading, they will distance people from it. That's why the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "After me will come people who will not follow my Sunnah nor be guided by my hand." Whoever among you lives to see that time should not be a tax collector or a leader for them. He shouldn't work in the financial apparatus or the police, security, or military apparatus. A tax collector, a leader in the security or military apparatus, a soldier, their psyche is shaped to obey orders. This is extremely dangerous. Pharaoh commanded people to follow them, and they followed them. So we seized him and his soldiers and threw them into the sea. Here, you see something of the characteristics of pre-Islamic ignorance, and that pre-Islamic ignorance doesn't accept being let go of it. That's why, when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, migrated, people conspired against him. The people of Quraysh conspired against him. They plotted against him to kill him. And when those who disbelieved plotted against you to imprison you or kill you or expel you, they plotted, but Allah plotted. Now, the important lesson, the ninth one, is a lesson that will take us a little longer, so pay close attention. It concerns the permissibility of Muslims seeking refuge and protection with non-Muslims. This is a clear lesson, as the Muslims left Mecca and sought refuge with Abyssinia, whose ruler was not a Muslim. This brings us back to the issue of the preacher's need in every time and place to utilize the laws of the pre-Islamic era in which he lives. No preacher can start from scratch. No preacher can escape his reality. The preacher exists within an existing reality, dominated and controlled, from which he cannot break free. Therefore, the preacher benefits from the existing laws, even if he does not believe in them. We mentioned that this includes what the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, did in utilizing the tribal laws of the pre-Islamic tribe Banu Hashim. This was a tribal law. Even though the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, taught the Muslims that truth is above all else, tribalism support your brother, whether he is an oppressor or oppressed. They said, O Messenger of God, we support him when he is oppressed, but how can we support him when he is an oppressor? This question from the companion shows the change that occurred among the Muslims, because before that, they understood this phrase literally. We mentioned to you the poet's saying, and sometimes we turn to our brother Bakr if we find no one but our brother. They do not question their brother when he calls upon them in times of hardship, asking for proof of what he said. An old pre-Islamic Arab was with his people without hesitation. As Durayd ibn al-Simr said, when they disobeyed me, I was one of them and I saw their error, or perhaps I was not guided. And not but one of Garzir. If Garzir goes astray, I go astray. If Garzir is guided, I am guided. So, with the Prophet's teaching, the companions understood. They said, O Messenger of God, we support him when he is an oppressor, but how can we support him when he is oppressed? He said, by preventing him from oppression. So, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, although he was teaching his companions not to let tribalism overcome them, benefited from the tribalism law that existed in the pre-Islamic era. The Prophet benefited from the law of protection and entered into the protection of Mutim ibn Adi, and Abu Bakr was under the protection of Ibn al-Dinar, and this is one of the other laws that they entered under the protection of non-Muslims and migrated to non-Muslim lands. But here, my brothers, the matter requires a great care and extreme vigilance, because life in the lands of the disbelievers is a trial. Life in the lands of the disbelievers is a trial. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, I am free from responsibility for whoever resides among the polytheists, and the principle is that residing in the lands of the disbelievers is prohibited. This is the principle. The principle is the prohibition of residing in the lands of the disbelievers. Why? Here we come to the solution to the problem that I mentioned to you before, which is reconciling the hadith of Salamah, may God be pleased with her, with the hadith of Asma bint Umays. Salamah is talking about the political level, so we resided with him in the best of homes, with the best of neighbors. So the political level gives them protection, like when you have citizenship now. But at the popular level, you might find racism, you might find hardship, you might find problems. I mean, it is true that the political level might grant you the right of residency, but at the popular level, not everyone is like that. The king wanted this to be normal, so she said, we were being harmed. This is the harm, and we are afraid that the first thing that happens is any tension in the political process, in new elections, in a military coup. What happens in the world of immigrants? Of course, she was afraid. She said this to Umar, and he told her, we preceded you to the Messenger of God. She replied, no, the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, was with you, feeding your hungry and teaching your ignorant. Look at the companions when they missed the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and look at the Messenger of God's place among his people. The hungry would go to the Messenger of God, as in the famous hadith of Abu Hurairah. You know, I was hungry, the famous hadith. Abu Hurairah was overcome by hunger, so he went to Abu Bakr to ask him about something. Abu Bakr answered him, saying, I don't know the answer, but he said, just so I know. Then he went to Umar, and the same thing happened. He said, so I went to the Messenger of God, and he said, come here, Abu Hurairah, come here. When Abu Bakr and Umar, may God be pleased with them, had a disagreement, Abu Bakr said, I went to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and said, O Messenger of God, there was a matter between me and Ibn al-Khattab, so I came to you. Look, when two companions had a dispute, their refuge was with the Prophet. He said, so we knew anger was evident on the face of the Messenger of God, and he said, will you leave my companion alone? I was the one who wronged. Then Umar, our master Umar, came forward, reflected on his actions and went to Abu Bakr's house, but he did not find him. So, he went to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Of course, this atmosphere in Medina was something those who were in Abyssinia lacked. Therefore, how could they be more deserving of the Messenger of God? The Messenger of God was with you, feeding your hungry and teaching your ignorant. But we were in the land of distant, hateful people, and we were harmed and afraid. So, the truth is that, living in the lands of the disbelievers, even if the Negus was its ruler, was not without hardship and difficulty. But now, in our time, the matter has become much more difficult. Of course, I understand that our Arab world and our Islamic world are now sending their children to Western countries because of the tyranny, oppression, and brutality in our lands. But, my brothers, we must be careful, because most of those who migrated to live in the lands of disbelief are undoubtedly leads to weakness in faith. It is extremely rare for anyone to escape this influence. If a Muslim in the Muslim world does and choose righteous companions, he is likely to perish and go astray. So what about a country where you lack the call to prayer, where you lack Islamic practices, where you lack a Muslim community? Therefore, whoever has the means, I mean, the issue of deviations that occur among immigrants to non-Muslim lands is a well-known and documented issue. You all know it. And even worse is what happens to the children. Children grow up in a non-Muslim society, so Islam and disbelief become their only options. And disbelief is more likely because they see it in the street, in school, and in the media. It is rare to find a Muslim in the third generation, the generation of grandchildren. It is rare to find a Muslim in this generation. The default assumption is that they will not become Muslim and will fall into disbelief. These are statistics and facts. Anyone who wants to investigate them can do so. Therefore, the truth is that residing in non-Muslim lands is a trial. For this reason, we must reflect on the matter of the permissibility of residing in non-Muslim lands. Necessity, harm, or compulsion is conditional on the absence of religious strife. It is conditional on the absence of religious strife. And the truth is, of course, what is happening in our world now. I will also bring you a story from Abyssinia, but I want to say that if we are now talking about the West, the matter has now become very serious. Why? Because now some Western countries are forcing children to learn things that contradict Islam. They force them to learn what's in the school curriculum, what's in the sex education, what's in the concept that a normal family can consist of 2 men and 2 women, or a man and a woman. They are forced to teach this. Sometimes it goes even further, to the point that families who teach their sons and daughters about honor are considered to be restricting their freedom. Some laws even allow these countries to take children. Look at what's happening in Sweden, the kidnapping of Muslim mothers and children, and then entrusting them to non-Muslim families. Terrible tragedies are occurring. This doesn't apply to what applied to Ethiopia. We must understand this, reflect on it, and be fully aware of it. Not every country is suitable for immigration. Now people cite the Prophet, peace be upon him, or his companions as justification for migrating to Ethiopia. But countries where a Muslim cannot practice his religion are no longer acceptable. This is a matter of principle, and things are even worse. I've seen this even among those affiliated with Islamic movements. Unfortunately, sometimes a young man grows up and becomes attached to this country. I mean, now naturalization of immigrants, and then the conscription of immigrants, for example, an Egyptian, Syrian, Iraqi, or Yemeni could become a soldier in the German or Dutch army. I've seen people who grew up there. Their fathers, for instance, were leaders in Islamic activism in the past, and they went there and grew up in France. When we held a council and were asked, if France is going to fight a group of Muslims, will you join the French army? They would say, yes, of course. They say it without realizing that they are going against the religion. They see it as obedience to the French government, as part of their faith. This is a loss, my friends, a loss, a loss. This is a grave danger. Whoever knows they are going to a country should be extremely careful and attentive to what might happen to them and their children after them if they grow up in that country. Going to Ethiopia, going to non-Muslim lands is conditional on not compromising one's faith. The clearest proof of this is that when Jafar, may God be pleased with him, was asked about his statement regarding Jesus, means that when the contradiction arose between migration and security, and between neglecting religion, what did they choose? They chose religion and surrendering once again to Mecca, and they were tortured once again in Mecca. This means that anyone in a country who has the choice between surrendering to Sisi or anyone else and remaining in that country under conditions that would strip them of their faith should choose to return. God Almighty has made this easy, so there are no people now who are forced into these two bitter choices, rather, as God Almighty said, and whoever emigrates for the cause of God will find it on the earth many places of refuge. And as he said, was not the earth of God spacious enough for you to emigrate therein? This is something we must pay attention to. Of course, we must not forget in any case this is the 10th lesson, that immigration itself is a test and a trial. All of worldly life is a trial, a test. He who created death and life said, to test you as to which of you is best indeed. And he said, and we have made some of you a trial for others. Will you be patient? And we will surely test you, until we know those of you who strive in the cause of God and those who are patient, and we will test your affairs. So immigration is all a trial. Immigration is all of life, and migration is also a trial. Among the painful things that happened here is that one of the Muslims who migrated to Abyssinia, named Ubaydullah ibn Jarsh, went to Abyssinia, converted to Christianity there, and died an unbeliever. Therefore, of course, firstly, one should never feel secure in oneself. That is why the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, used to supplicate, O Allah, turner of hearts, keep my heart firm upon your religion. And our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, hearts are between two of the fingers of the Most Merciful. He turns them as he wills. And Allah, blessed and exalted is he, said, and know that Allah comes between a man and his heart. And he, the exalted, said, and we will turn their hearts and their eyes away, just as they did not believe the first time, and we will leave them in their transgression wandering blindly. You, and how many times have we seen in our lives, glory be to Allah, someone who was a mujahid, meaning he was now fulfilling the highest pinnacle of Islam. Then his situation changed and he became a spy and an agent for Western and local agencies, committing the most despicable acts a human being can commit. He turned from that to this, So, a person should not feel secure even in migration. And we here, of course, in 2KI see a scene from this, how many devout, believing Muslims came here and were lost, deviated, and became ultimately here in Turkey. It's a Muslim country where the call to prayer is recited and religious lessons are still being taught. No one is harmed if they seek knowledge or religious instruction. But this happened in Europe and in Turkey. How many Muslim girls went astray at the same time that Turks became more religious and committed to their faith at the hands of Arab immigrants? God, may he be blessed and exalted, turns hearts and eyes. Now, you see a man from among the immigrants to Seerah who converted to Christianity and died a disbeliever. His wife was Habiba Ramler bint Abi Sufyan. When he converted and died, the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, married her. She is the mother of the believers, Habiba Ramler bint Abi Sufyan. Abi Sufyan was Sakhar ibn Harb, the famous Qurayshi leader. Now, the 11th lesson, of course. Whoever didn't record it will surely forget. I myself would forget if I didn't keep it in front of me in this order. That's why they used to say, knowledge is a prey, and writing is its snare. Tie your prey with strong ropes. And of course, this is the text, the eloquent, Westerners, practical and insightful, used to say that weak ink is better than a strong memory. But this concise, practical saying was embellished by our poet friend of old with his saying, knowledge is a hunt, and writing is its snare. Bind your prey with strong ropes. Now, the 11th lesson. This is another point, good people, regarding the issue of sacrifice and competence. Now, it is assumed that the Muslims migrated to Abyssinia. Why? The assumption is that he was saved from harm, persecution, and torture, right? So who was their leader? Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the man who was not persecuted, harmed, or tortured. Here we return again to that. There is a difference between patience, sacrifice, steadfastness, and resilience, and between all of this and competence and talent. We touched on that when we mentioned that Bilal ibn Rabah did not take on any of the Muslims' affairs after that, even though he was the most patient, steadfast, and sacrificial of them. As in the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, he considered his life insignificant in the cause of God, while those who had converted to Islam months before did not take on the affairs. For example, our master Amr ibn al-As took command of a secret force that included the first of the Muhajirin and Ansar. 4 months after his conversion to Islam, our master Khalid ibn al-Walid, the first battle he entered was the Battle of Mu'tah when the 3 leaders died. The Muslims entrusted the command to him, and he led them back. Abu Dihar was one of the first of the Muhajirin and one of the enthusiastic callers, as we mentioned when he said to the Prophet, "Will you not appoint me, O Messenger of God?" He said, "O Abu Dihar, you are weak, and it is a trust, and on the day of resurrection it will be a source of shame and regret." In another hadith, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said to Abu Dihar, "I advise you not to be in charge of 2 people and not to manage the wealth of an orphan." This Abu Dihar was one of the first to embrace Islam. Abu Bakr was not tortured as Bilal was, but he was the Prophet's first minister and his successor after him. This means we must get rid of a misconception that has become widespread in the Islamic movement, which is that this man, because of his history, his sacrifices, and his steadfastness, should assume a leadership position. This is one thing, and that is another. Now we see that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, appointed a man who had not been harmed or persecuted to lead the immigrants to Abyssinia. even though they had originally fled from harm and persecution. This is clear, of course, if we consider the Islamic approach to the issue of men and the Prophet's approach, peace and blessings be upon him, in appointing men.
وليس أكفأ الموثوقين. يعني إذا نحن الآن في أزمة بين الثقة وبين الكفاءة.
So, we are now in a crisis between trust and competence is distinguished between those who are trustworthy and those who are competent. Looking at the Prophet's peace and blessings be upon him path and approach, we see that he appointed those who were competent, choosing the most trustworthy among them. He did not appoint those who were merely trusted, but rather those who were equally competent. The primary criterion was competence for their task. Therefore, it was rare for an official to err in his duties. These were rare occurrences, isolated incidents. Indeed, some companions are only known to have had one instance of being appointed by the Prophet to a task or sent on a military expedition. This demonstrates the Prophet's peace and blessings be upon him great ability to discern and assess people. Now, if we consider Ja'far, may God be pleased with him, what qualifications did he possess for the role of ambassador? Firstly, we mentioned that he was eloquent and articulate, as is very clear in the hadith we cited. Secondly, he was handsome, and the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said in the hadith, "You resemble me in both appearance and character." He was handsome in both appearance and character. Moreover, he was close to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Being his cousin, we can say he was a high-ranking ambassador, not a second or third-tier diplomat, not an assistant to the deputy foreign minister. This man, the ambassador, was a high-ranking one, and therefore his expression of Islam to the negus was trustworthy because he was the cousin of the one who sent this message. So, here's a point to consider. This incident in Sunnah shows us that the Prophet chose the most capable person, even if he wasn't the most qualified. Okay, the 12th lesson, and this is a serious one, is that it is permissible to remain silent about the truth, but it is not permissible to speak falsehood. For example, in the first meeting with the negus, when he asked him if he had anything to say about what he brought, what did Ja'far, may God be pleased with him, do? He recited the common narrative that Muslims and Christians venerate, which is that of Zechariah and John. So, he spoke the truth. He did and just come up with it the first time, and then disappear. What did he say about the matter of Jesus, peace be upon him? So, it is permissible to remain silent about the truth. We also, unfortunately, and something that many people don't understand, sometimes feel that some religious people are merchants of enmity. Like, who here should we fight with? It's so-and-so. So-and-so has 1, 2, and 3, and so has 1, 2, and 3, and so has 1, 2, and 3, and you can't sit with him in a gathering or even comment on your social media without him picking up on 1 or 2 mistakes from the entire missionary journey of this sheikh or this scholar or this mujahid, and so on. There are people, subhanallah, as if they are merchants of enmity deals, which is, my friends, where is the dormant enemy so that we can provoke him? Now, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib knew from the first moment that these people believe that Jesus is God. But he did not bring up this topic. Well, when he brought up this topic, he did not speak falsehood, and this also means, as there is a lesson for the group of merchants of deals and merchants of enmity. There is also a lesson for those who are called the shrewd and the owners of political realism, which is, do not give a vague answer, and whenever he is asked about something, he seeks the answer that satisfies the questioner. What is this, my friends? What is it? So, if a Muslim is in agreement with all people, then why is he a Muslim in the first place? I mean, if I were to go own property and argumentation in the best way, and I took from Islam what is compatible with the West and went to the communists, by God, Islam has solidarity, rights for the poor and rights for workers. The natural thing is, you are calling to what you preach, so why don't you enter our religion? I mean, if I were to always go to the Christians and say to him, we venerate Jesus, we venerate Mary, we venerate Moses, and we believe in the gospel, so why aren't you a Christian? This is a very, very important balance for the world of preachers. For example, I will tell you about some of the translations that were issued in some translations of the Holy Quran that were issued in the West. A translator came across the verse, and those wives from whom you fear disobedience first advised them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them, and added a footnote, saying, yes, this text is mentioned in the Holy Quran, but the Messenger of God never struck a woman, as mentioned in the authentic hadith. What did this translator do? I'm sure he meant well, but what did he do? He apologized for the religion, meaning he saw that this verse didn't suit Western tastes, so he added something in the footnote that suited Western tastes. My dear people, your duty is only to deliver the message. I'm not here to tell people what they want to hear. I'm not on a program that caters to listeners or viewers. You are a warner. Your duty is only to deliver the message. I present God's religion as it is, not as people desire. Yes, it's true to address people according to their level of understanding, but if I'm translating the Holy Quran now, should I hide anything from it, apologize, or comment? You see here in the work of the Muslims, our Master Jafar. Yes, certainly he didn't earn the enmity of the niggers. He didn't initiate it, he didn't accuse them of being in the wrong, but when he was asked, he did, and apologize for his religion. And surely the Muslims in Abyssinia, I mean, they weren't living in a state of chaos, with every Abyssinian passing by them saying, you are misguided, you believe that Jesus is God, and that's not true. So, it is permissible to remain silent about the truth, but it is not permissible to speak falsehood. Sheikh Al-Tarifi, may God release him from captivity, had a beautiful saying, preachers must explain the religion, even if they don't practice it, so that people don't come out saying, we didn't hear of this among our forefathers. How can religion diminish and disappear if everyone who fears something conceals the truth? That's why Imam Ahmad remained steadfast during the ordeal and said, if the scholar remains silent, and the ignorant or weak person is hypocritical, well, then how will people know who is teaching them? Here is a lesson in Islamic diplomacy, a lesson for Muslim preachers. It's true that you shouldn't initiate hostilities or open all fronts, but if you are put in a position to clarify, you cannot delay or fail to clarify. Of course, what also falls under this is that the Muslims did not prostrate to the king. Of course, it was part of the protocol that those entering the king's presence should prostrate, so the Muslims did not. Our master wanted Amr to embarrass them, said, do not prostrate to the king. Do you not know the protocol, people? Is this acceptable? Do not prostrate to the king. Do not glorify the king. You have shown contempt for the position of the President of the Republic, complete contempt for the presidency, and so on. They said, our Prophet taught us not to prostrate except to God. So, if a person is led to falsehood, he will not respond to it. Okay, Lesson 13 is about the difference between justice and injustice and between right and wrong. Look, the truth is something that cannot be forced upon you, but falsehood can. Justice preserves your right to disagree with him and preserves your rights even if you disagree with him. But injustice, oppression, and falsehood do not do that. So, what would have happened if the negus hadn't been just? What choices would the Muslims have had? Either you embrace my religion, or I will. Even though the negus couldn't declare his own Islam, he did, and hand them over. This is a crucial point and a significant difference. That's why Islam says, there is no compulsion in religion. Righteousness has become distinct from error. You can't force people to be believers. Islam doesn't coerce people into it, but falsehood does. Ignorance does. Now, I want to address this point. Many people, for example, imagine that secularism doesn't coerce you. That's incorrect. Secularism only leaves you your home and your mosque corner. You can do whatever you want there, but in the street, in the laws, in life, you are obligated to abide by the laws. Secularism doesn't accept separate laws for different religions. One state, one sovereignty, one authority, one judiciary, one constitution, and one set of laws. That is coercion. But when Muslims were masters of this world, and when they were the people of this civilization, they allowed others Muslims should take their cases to their judges unless these people request to take their cases to Muslims, then that is fine. This is an important difference between right and wrong. Therefore, in truth, my good people, there is a famous saying that justice is in the conscience of the judge and not in the text of the law. A just judge, if faced with a flawed law, can issue a just ruling and adapt the law. A corrupt and unjust judge, no matter how just a law or even the Sharia of God Almighty is presented to him, will alter, change, and manipulate it, leading others astray and committing
ومما يتعلق بهذا أيضا وهذا يجب أن نفهمه في حياتنا دستور علماني مع شخص مسلم وصاحب مبدأ الحال عنده أفضل من دستور ينص على الشريعة مع واحد فاسد لأنه هذا الحاكم المسلم صاحب المبدأ يستطيع أن
injustice under its guise. Related to this, and this is something we must understand in our lives, is that a secular constitution under a principled Muslim ruler is better than a constitution based on Sharia law under a corrupt one. This is because the principled Muslim ruler can extract justice even from secular texts, while the corrupt, self-serving ruler can corrupt even in the name of Islamic law. Understanding and comprehending this greatly influences our reading of contemporary reality and our perception of the conditions of nations, states, kings, and rulers. Consider the Negus. Despite the dominance of a false religion, he was able, even under these circumstances, to secure the safety of Muslims. And consider countries ruled by Islam where Muslims are either killed, persecuted, or imprisoned. Some have died and others await their fate. Incidentally, the global system is built on installing those with vested interests for this very reason. And by God, the Westerners have written extensively on this subject. The danger posed by principled individuals is highlighted in a well-known and insightful book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, authored by John Perkins, an economist working for multinational corporations. Perkins argues that the global economic system is built On the personal corruption of a country's leader, he contends that the leader must be corrupt because, if corrupt, the international financial system can manipulate him into a deal. A proposed deal, he explains, is that the leader and his cronies become wealthy, while the country remains impoverished, even if a leader is not corrupt, one who wants to develop his country. He poses a threat to the global system. Perkins states that the West has 3 steps to eliminate principled individuals, citing assassinations carried Latin America, Panama, Ecuador, Chile, and Pakistan. Zerul Haq explains that these 3 steps are as follows. Of the first is a military coup. If the leader doesn't accept this deal, a coup will be staged against him. But what if he survives the coup? The military leader, meaning he was capable of controlling the army, would then take the second step, assassination. If he secured himself well, the third step would be occupation. Therefore, when a leader emerges, you'll find most Western analysts discussing his social upbringing and personality. Was he from a village or a city, a neighborhood or a gated community? What were his relationships like? What values governed him? Because this determines his responsiveness to what is required of him. This relates to the lesson we just mentioned. Lesson 14, which is often overlooked: the Prophet's peace be upon him monitoring of the situation of the immigrants in Abyssinia. The Prophet was in Mecca and Medina, and he had a state, yet he never ceased to mention and follow the news of the people of Abyssinia. Incidentally, I won't say many, we said that around 100 people went to Abyssinia in the second migration. Of these, 33 returned to Mecca and then migrated to Medina. Not everyone who went to Abyssinia remained in the 7th year of the Hijra. Some returned before the migration to Medina, the city, and Hajar with a prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace. Among those who returned from Abyssinia, for example, was Mrs. Sorter bint Zamar and her husband Sakrin bin Amr. When Mrs. Sorter's husband died, the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, married her. As we mentioned a little while ago, when Ubayd Allah bin Jarsh died, leaving behind Habiba Ramla bint Abi Sufyan, the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, sent to her to marry her. The Negus prepared her for him. The Negus was the one who gave her a dowry, and he was the one who prepared her with her belongings and sent her to the Prophet. May God bless him and grant him peace in Medina. Lesson 15 is what we learn about the Negus. The Negus was a Muslim ruler, but he was unable to fully implement Islamic law. As Ibn Hisham recounts in his biography, when some rebellion arose against him, he wrote in a simple analogy, I bear witness that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God, and that Jesus is the servant of God and his messenger, and placed it on his right shoulder. When the rebellion began, he addressed them, saying, O people of Abyssinia, am I not the one most deserving of your favor? They replied, Yes. He asked, Have I not been just to you? They replied, Yes. He asked, How did you treat him? They replied, The best of treatment. He asked, Then why are you doing this? They replied, You have changed your religion and said that Jesus is a servant. He asked, What do you say about Jesus? They replied, We say that he is God and that he is the Son of God. He said, He is here with me, thus alluding, in a way, to his belief about Jesus. Imam al-Suhaili, in his book Al-Ward al-Anuf, states that this demonstrates that it is not permissible for a Muslim to lie as long as there is room for ambiguity. The Negus's actions have shown scholars that not all Muslim rulers are capable of fully implementing Islamic law due to many circumstances, including international pressure and internal pressures, meaning a people newly converted to Islam and a people newly converted from pre-Islamic ignorance. This includes the situation of Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz, may God be pleased with him. Although he was considered the fifth rightly guided caliph, he was unable to fully restore Islam to its state during the time of the rightly guided caliphs. The lesson of the Negus is this: to weigh the actions of a ruler. He who sought the truth but erred, fell short, or was slow in pursuing it is not equal to he who sought falsehood and succeeded. It is essential to understand that a ruler who guides society from ignorance different, and this must be understood in the affairs of this life. Now, the 16th and final lesson is that no one knows the unseen. We will see that our master Amr ibn al-As, who was the Muslims' primary enemy in Abyssinia, would embrace Islam and become one of the great Muslim leaders, using his cunning, genius, and intelligence to support the Muslims. And when our master Umar ibn al-Khattab was told that Amr ibn al-As was besieging Jerusalem and that there was Artaban of the Romans was one of the leaders renowned for his intelligence and shrewdness, our master Amr had a beautiful story with him, which, if life permits, we will tell you. Our master Amr used to say, "We have defeated Artaban of the Romans with Artaban of the Arabs," and you know, as the saying goes, a letter will not be accepted unless the donkey of a letter accepts.
لعل الله تبارك وتعالى يحدث بعد ذلك أمرا. طيب، من الطريف طبعا في قصة سيدنا عمرو أنه الصحابي الوحيد فيما أعلم الذي أسلم على يد تابعي. خلص الوقت.
No one imagined that our master Amr could convert to Islam. No one knows the unseen, and you never know, perhaps God Almighty will bring about something good after that. Interestingly, in the story of our master Amr, he is the only companion, to my knowledge,